sit comfortably with your spine erect. And first of all, place your attention on the breathing, the respiration. Let go of all the other thoughts, worries. When your mind is partially settled, bring your attention down to your heart chakra, to your subtle spot. The subtlemost mind resides. And just with one part of the mind, try to observe the nature of your mental consciousness, the clear light nature, conventional clear light nature. It doesn't present itself directly at first. You have to do a little bit of understanding, analysis. The fact that the various thoughts are unimpeded by the mind, you start to develop a mental image of its openness, of its unimpeded nature, unobstructing nature. Like a clear sky. Let go of all the thought patterns, worries, plans. Try to take as your object of concentration just this clear light nature. And think how fortunate we are to have the chance to meet the Dharma, to study it in some depth right now. We have a life of freedom from immense suffering, hindrances that prevented us over numberless lives from even encountering the Dharma. And we have a kind of richness in our life, various factors occurring. We're not suffering, but also we've got some positive qualities of having been born in a time when the Dharma still exists. People are practicing it. There's the opportunity to encounter benefactors of the Dharma that help to start centers, people that work for them and so forth. The Sangha exists. Such an opportunity like this is very, very rare, the Buddha taught. Incredibly rare within the course of our succession of rebirths. And while we have this opportunity, which is with every second fleeting away from us, getting closer and closer to death, while we have this opportunity, we should try to recognize what we can do with it, rather than just acquiring wealth and fame and reputation, pleasures, one after the other, within this lifetime, relationships. All of these goals that the world usually holds as very important are transitory. They don't leave a lasting impact or satisfaction within our mind. And even the achievement of them temporarily, if we really watch carefully, doesn't really bring real satisfaction. Desiring to get out of this endless circle of suffering, it's the first awakening of renunciation, seeing that it's possible. And trying from the very beginning to develop a sense of responsibility toward others. Warm heart, forgiving, recognizing their kindness of all living beings. So right from the start, even if we were to begin to think about liberation, recognizing that we would be doing a great disservice to others by simply seeking our own salvation, our own release. That the Buddha himself taught, the Mahayana Sutras, it's much more noble, much more effective to work for in total enlightenment. Utter, total enlightenment for the welfare of all living beings. To do that, we have to practice the bodhisattva activities, those that deal with conventional reality, the method side, learning how to be generous and ethical, patient and perseverant, particularly concentrated, calming the mind, but aiming, all of them aiming toward the perfection of wisdom, that along with the practice of the other perfections, the 5 first perfections, it, practiced in a unified way, can bring about the elimination of all the faults from our mind, total enlightenment. The perfection of wisdom, very, very deep, difficult to understand, but very, very liberating. Knowing how rare it is to not only have a perfect human rebirth, but to meet such teachings and to study the perfection of wisdom, to leave imprints in our mind, to quickly realize, to practice that for the welfare of others. I'm going to listen to the teaching tonight and during this course, study, listen, contemplate, meditate, in order to get closer to that understanding. I'm going to listen to the teachings on the perfection of wisdom, the short, brief teaching, the sutra called the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom, Heart Sutra, in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then, as is traditional before teaching on the Heart Sutra, we're going to recite the Heart Sutra translation in English, anyway. And someone has translated here, might be my translation, I'm not sure. Which page is it on? Anyone know?
9.
Of?
Teaching course.
Page 9, Teaching Prayers. So the many translations. This is the text that we're going to be studying. And later we'll also say a preamble, praise to the perfection of wisdom, especially when we don't have time to read the whole thing. But tonight we're going to read the short sutra. So if you know a little bit of the meaning, try to meditate on the meaning of the words as we recite. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on mass of Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena, profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharitvati-putra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obstruction, without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tadyata gati gate paragate parasamgati bodhi svaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharitvati-putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. So this is the great Heart Sutra that you may have heard about. You've probably recited in the beginning of many courses, right? One time or another, some courses. Usually, when discourses are given by Tibetan lamas, they often, in large groups, they'll often recite as a group, along with the audience, the Heart Sutra, because just its recitation helps to overcome hindrances, obstacles to the actual listening of the teaching. And especially if you meditate on the meaning, maybe some of us don't know. I certainly don't know the meaning. Maybe some of you know. But if you understand the meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, can be meditated on. My teacher said, when I was at Sera Monastery, teaching Lama Osel some years, when the monks would recite the Heart Sutra, they would recite it at a normal pace, but in Tibet, it's said that there were certain recitations of the Heart Sutra that were done. One could go from the monastery out into Lhasa. You know where Sera is? Have you been to Tibet? Anyone? Who's been to Tibet? Go from Sera into Lhasa and go around the temples in one of the circumambulations and come back and the prayer would not be done. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it would be like walking down from here to the end of the road, not just by the bridge, but all the way down to Glenhaven Road or something like that, and then walking around in a big circle and coming back. So in other words, they'd just be reciting the Heart Sutra once. So in other words, the monks would be reciting it very slowly and meditating on each word. Sometimes almost we might get the impression sometimes when it's done in a group, if we don't have any experience of it, we might think it's fashionable to recite it as fast as possible. I don't know, sometimes if you know the meaning of something, to meditate on the meaning, to go very slowly, it has great benefit. On the other hand, if you know the meaning, maybe to acquire many recitations, many repetitions can be useful. But if you don't know the meaning, I don't know. Because, of course, maybe again, there's some benefit in reciting, but it's not necessarily something that has to be recited very quickly, sort of like you can't even follow it. You should try to think of the meaning of the words, and that's why one has to study it. Otherwise, you don't have any. You might have your own preconceptions of what things mean, right? What the text means. There are many, many people that have in the West that have written their own commentaries. I've seen some, and some of them are a little bit idiosyncratic, their own ideas of what things mean. We're not going to be studying from someone's own understanding, other than the Buddha's understanding, as was passed down through the great Indian scholars that wrote commentaries on it. And a couple of Tibetan lamas who wrote commentaries earlier, one of which was chosen as the main commentary to be used in the basic program. There are a couple of different Tibetan commentaries and Indian commentaries that were translated into Tibet in the Tengyur, right? But and some of them, as we'll see as we study this, they have different interpretations. Some of them interpret the Heart Sutra from the Chittamatra point of view. Some of them don't necessarily take a definite, obvious doctrinal position, but they interpret from the point of view of some other aspect. Some of them are from the point of view of Tantra. So the particular commentary that we're going to use is one that was translated by Don Lopez in this book. It's not that he, it's just one that he, many of the commentaries that he translated, and it's on chapter 10 of the Heart Sutra Explained. It's called Commentary on the Heart Sutra, Jewel Light Illuminating the Meaning, by Dendar Laramba, a Tibetan Lama. That's not the only text. We're not going to use only that text. We're going to go through the Perfection of Wisdom itself, the Heart Sutra, and use this as the main basis. So if you were examined on it, this is sort of the position you're supposed to take. Right? Like when we studied Low Rig. Remember when we studied some of the other courses, even though we know that at Losaling or some other college, they said this or that, the position of the Sarah J was different. So this is the commentary that's being used. So this is good. There's also another book by Don Lopez. I think when he did a translation of the Heart Sutra, which you can read in the front. It's a little bit different than the translation that we're using. And he did a general commentary in the beginning of this text, going through the various things, the title and the prologue and the setting and so forth. And then he translated a couple of commentaries here, Tibetan commentaries, I think. But in another text he wrote, he translated, Elaborations on Emptiness, he translated several of the Indian commentaries, not from Sanskrit, but as they were translated into Tibetan, because he's proficient in Tibetan. Kind of a modern scholar. I think he's up at Michigan, University of Michigan. I don't know if he'll ever see these. He probably wouldn't lower himself to watch some course like this. A little bit irreverent. I don't know if he's really a Buddhist. When he's had meetings with the Dalai Lama, he's made comments like, oh, the Buddha didn't really teach this or that. And it's a little bit kind of like a modern scholar. I actually find some of his commentary in here to be a little bit like, So if you were to read some of this, you don't necessarily have to take everything that he says as, the gospel. It's kind of like a scholar's take. But his translations are pretty good. So there are some commentaries in here from different Indian scholars, sort of like from the Tantric point of view, the Svatantrika point of view, the Chittamatra point of view, different things, and of course the Prasangika point of view. Also, Atisha's commentary maybe, and one other, maybe some others are the ones that, of the Indian commentaries that are most relevant because they're very, very, they came at the culmination of a lot of study and understanding of it for many, many centuries. Another text that was, I think everyone received a copy of, was from this text that Wisdom Publications did some years ago. I think it's out of print now. Echoes of Voidness, 3 different teachings by Geshe Rapton, who was one of my gurus. And Geshe Rapton has a commentary on the Heart Sutra, and I think that's a little booklet that you all have, right? So that's also quite good. That may be, to a good extent, following Tendala Rampa's commentary. In this text, if you ever get a chance to get the whole text, there's also a translation of the 6th chapter of the Majjhimika Vatara by Chandrakirti on emptiness. And then how to meditate on the Mahamudra, like the clear light nature of the mind. 3 different parts. So that's why he calls it Echoes of Voidness, perhaps. Translated by Stephen Batchelor. So that's okay. Also, some of you have Geshe's, Sonam Rinpoche's commentary, right? Where is it? What's it called?
The Heart Sutra.
It's just called The Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra. And translated probably by Ruth Sonam. Geshe Sonam Rinpoche is the teacher at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, very nice Tibetan Geshe. And so Ruth Sonam is quite a good translator, so that may help also. Give it a little, when things are unclear. I don't know, there's a lot of other translations you might run across. You take a look at them, but I don't want to mention any names. But there's some modern scholars, sort of authors, who haven't really studied Buddhism in a traditional way, but they're almost writing kind of poetic translations of the Heart Sutra and some other things. Here we're going to go by what the tradition says the meaning is, rather than our own creation. Beautiful. I think it should mean this, and New Age or something like that. Okay. So the Heart Sutra when was the Heart Sutra written? Do you know, Carrie? 18th century, 17th century? Do you know, Dorje? Come on.
Specifically mean written?
Well, I said written, but you can say composed. When was composed? Do you know, Thea? Of course, understanding that we have is that this is an actual occurrence that took place during the time of the Buddha and was recited amongst the sutras when the sutras were revised, or what's the word, reviewed after the Buddha's passing. May have been recited by Shariputra, by Ananda, as he supposedly recited all the sutras, but since this is a Mahayana sutra, it may have been recited by one of the other bodhisattvas, but from memory. There's always some discussion and doubt about this. But the point of view, certainly of the Mahayana, is that this was an actual occurrence during the time of the Buddha. It wasn't composed by Nagarjuna or someone else later, although some modern scholars, the same way that they analyze the Bible and various things, they try to do study of the language of the text, the way it was constructed, in the versions that we have available in the ancient written texts that they can find. And sometimes they'll say it may have occurred quite late, after, not as early as the other Prajnaparamita sutras. Some of the scholars would say the Prajnaparamita sutras were written or composed maybe around the time of Christ or a couple of hundred years after. It's varied over the last couple of decades what the scholars think the Mahayana sutras were composed. They think they were written by people at that time. The Mahayana understanding is that after the Buddha passed away, the Mahayana teachings were practiced by certain Mahayana practitioners, especially bodhisattvas, kept by them, but it became kind of a hidden teaching for some time. And it wasn't until many hundreds of years later that those texts were written down. Actually, the Theravada texts, the so-called Theravada canon, was not written down at the time of the Buddha's life, right? Do you know that? It was written down several hundred years later. But those, sometimes in the Theravada tradition, it would be considered that they're authentic, the Theravada canon, the Tripitaka of their sutras and Vinaya and Abhidharma. But the Mahayana sutras, which they don't have in their canon, are inauthentic. You're also wondering, unauthentic, inauthentic? Because, not authentic, because they were written afterwards. Well, after the Theravada texts were written down. But the Theravada texts were not written down originally either. So it's just a matter of time. So judging by the language of the text and the subject matter, some people think that this is later the Heart Sutra was composed. Some of the scholars, this is not the Mahayana, general Mahayana position. Some of the scholars would say that it was composed later because of the language, because of the time that it appeared, that people started seeing it written down. And sort of like some of the, the fact that it has a mantra in it. There's a mantra in the Heart Sutra? What's the mantra? Om Mani Padme Hum? Gate gate parasamgate bodhisvaha. So that kind of indicates, they say, then it came at the time of the flourishing of Tantra, which was, the scholars would say, was being created by people. They see it, Buddhism as kind of historical events, do things being invented by people. That's not the general Buddhist understanding. We believe that the Buddha himself taught all of these teachings during his life in various forms. Taught the Theravada teachings, Hinayana teachings to main disciples. The Mahayana teachings, the second turning of the wheel of Dharma and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma especially, he taught mainly to those who were suitable disciples of the Mahayana. Sometimes some of the Hinayana disciples were there too, like in this case, Shariputra is here, right? Is Shariputra a bodhisattva or an arhat? Do you know? Yeah? Frank? That's you should. Is what? A hero. A hero. He is a hero. He's a Shravaka. Does that mean he can't be a bodhisattva? Well, usually, as we'll study in the Lanrim, when we have like the tree of assembled gurus, we have the Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas sequentially going up, and then the Buddhas and so forth. So generally, the hearers are considered to be those who were aiming, who were on the path or had achieved. You could say hearer, someone of hearer lineage. They don't necessarily have to be an arhat, but they're on that path. They've set their mind with a motivation of renunciation to achieve nirvana. Hearer arhats would be arhats. You wouldn't say hearer bodhisattvas. I mean, there are some who were hearers who achieved nirvana, and then later, after rising from nirvana, after many, many eons, the Buddha awakened them, they enter into the bodhisattva path. But generally, you don't call them hearer bodhisattvas. You would say someone who had achieved, arhatship in the hearer lineage first and then became a bodhisattva. So, yeah, Shariputra is not a bodhisattva. The way that Shariputra was manifesting during the life of Buddha, one of the two main disciples of Shakyamuni. But he was considered to be the best in wisdom. When the Buddha praised his various disciples, Kashyapya was the best in ascetic practice or something, and Madhgaulyana was the best in psychic powers or something like that, and of the Theravada disciples. And Shariputra was the foremost in wisdom. So people had questions, the Buddha would say, come see Shariputra. It's just like now maybe the gurus, like the Dalai Lama, if you had a question about some particular subject, the Dalai Lama might say, go visit, Kirti Senchab Rinpoche or Triden Rinpoche if you want to study that or this or that. They're kind of the experts foremost.
Is it kind of like how Rinpoche said to go visit Venerable George for questions?
Nothing like that at all. I don't know. What was I saying? So the text, as we understand it, the Heart Sutra, from the Mahayana point of view, is something that did take place at the time of the Buddha. It's called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. Is there just one Perfection of Wisdom Sutra? Or is it the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra? Do you know, Carrie? You don't know?
No idea.
You have no idea. Well, you will. The Buddha gave many discourses that can be categorized as the perfection of wisdom. Main topic was the perfection of wisdom, right? The most famous discourse, in a sense, most famous in a certain extent, is one that had three different versions. We talked about this before. It was called the Small Mother, the Middling Mother, and the Great Mother, Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. One of them is called the small is the 8,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. It's like one big volume in Tibetan. We say puti, one big volume. You know how the Tibetan texts are? Then there's the 25,000 verse Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I'm not sure how many volumes. I think it's about 3 or 4 volumes. Then there's the 100,000 verse, if you want to memorize something. So that's many, many volumes. In the Kangyur, as those are sutras, you'll find an 8,000 verse, a 25,000 verse, and a 100,000 verse. All of those three sutras are the same occurrence, recited by different people later. They're not like different discourses the Buddha gave, one that was short, one that was middling, one that was long, right? You've heard this before, right? We talked about this. So sometimes they're called the three mothers. It sounds like a rock and roll band, doesn't it? Something Dorje, Bjorn, Bjork. Bjork would have a part of, or Buckethead or something.
Brian's.
Oh, but Brian's is the Buckethead fan. Okay, so if you look under, if you see, there's a very good compendium of Perfection of Wisdom Sutras that Edward Conze. Have you heard of Edward Conze? I'm not sure if he was an American citizen, lived in England, or if he was English and came over. A Sanskrit scholar who sort of like did the foremost translations of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras from Sanskrit. He knew Tibetan pretty well also, but he's not someone who studied with Tibetan lamas. He's kind of just a scholar. One of the great ones, and one of his texts has a compendium of a lot of the other Perfection of Wisdom Sutras of various names. Heart Sutra is one of them. There's one, different ones requested by this, another one in so many verses, 800 verses or something. Those were different occasions. Okay, so there are many different Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. This is not the shortest. Do you know what the shortest Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is? Tenzin, do you know by any chance? The shortest Perfection of Wisdom Sutra is the Perfection of Wisdom in one syllable. I mean, the sutra is more than one syllable. It says the Buddha says to Shariputra something, and the one syllable "ah" encompasses the Perfection of Wisdom. Why is that? Do you know? Do you remember? Do you know, Vimal? Do you know any Hindi or Sanskrit? No. We talked in a little bit on some occasions. We talked a little bit about Sanskrit. The letter "ah" as a prefix, kind of like, maybe what would it be in English? Like anti means not, or as, not. So if you say anatma, atma means what? Soul or self, right? You know that word. That in Hinduism, we try to. One of the concepts was that we misperceive the Atma, but there is a great Atma that we try to merge with, right? The Buddha was quite radical in teaching anatma, which means what? No self. Okay, self, that there is no self. It's an-atma, not just a-atma, because atma itself begins with a. So when the word itself begins with a, the negating particle becomes an-atma. That means no self. So a is a negative particle because shunyata, emptiness, which is the object that is perceived, the ultimate nature of phenomena that is perceived by the wisdom realizing highest truth, the perfection of wisdom. That object, that truth, highest object truth, is itself a negative phenomena. It's a non-affirming negative. Do you remember what that means, Dorje? It means you negate something and you don't sort of say, well, he's not this, but he's this. You don't say that. You just say, he's not that. Phenomena are empty of true existence. You're not sort of placing anything else as a substitute for that. There are some kind of negations called affirming negations, in which you negate one thing, but you affirm something else in its place. Right? Emptiness, certainly from our studies, and generally in the Tibetan traditions, considered to be a non-affirming negation. Some of the Tibetan traditions have a little slightly different take, but in general, this is what Lama Tsongkhapa's understanding and reading Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna and Lord Buddha's teachings. So the perfection of wisdom in one syllable kind of has that flavor, meaning not, So the Heart Sutra is not the shortest. It's one of the briefest ones. It was very, very popular, still is very, very popular in Japan. I mean, different countries, different Buddhist countries kind of had their favorite sutras, right? Do you know what the kind of favorite sutras of Mongolia were? Diamond cutter, actually we say the Vajra cutter, yeah? Diamond is actually, in the actual title in Sanskrit and in Tibetan, the word diamond never comes. It's actually called Vajra Chetaka. Kind of was called in Chinese translation. They translated it as diamond. And Kanza and even some Western scholars bemoan the fact that people kind of got in the habit of calling it the diamond cutter, because even in the commentaries to it, in the Vajra cutter, the commentaries by Kamalashila and others, no reference to diamond at all, just to Vajra. Sometimes people think Vajra means diamond, but Vajra is you know what Vajra is, right? What a Vajra is? Vajra was, in the Hindu legends, was an implement that was created by one of the gods, Indra, in order to fend off some of the others. And we can look up the whole story sometime, but he had to find something that was indestructible. So there was one rishi, you know what a rishi is, one meditator, who had a human who had died and whose bones were sort of indestructible. So he took like the ribs and things and made this implement, kind of like a thunderbolt, kind of like we call the Vajra that's used in Tantra. And that indestructible weapon is actually what the word Vajra is referring to. So sometimes in Buddhism, Vajra, like when we talk about Vajrayana or Vajra in general, it's referring to indestructibility. Sometimes people take the analogy of the diamond, but even if you had a diamond weapon would be easily broken. You can break a diamond with a hammer, can't you? Doesn't have the same kind of implication as Vajra. But in Mongolia, Vajrakutter was one of the famous sutras. Another one was a golden light. Those were the two favorite sutras in Mongolia. I think that's one of the reasons Lama Zopa Rinpoche was so keen on the golden light, because when he was there, he wanted to actually go to the marketplace and sit down and read the Golden Light Sutra as the people walked by, so they would hear. In Japan, one of the very favorite sutras, besides some others, is the Heart Sutra, and the people even have, businessmen even have the Heart Sutra on their neckties, written on their neckties, and in other countries, in China and other places, you can get them written in very small letters, like some of the Bibles and things that are written very small. You get them as amulets and so forth. Oftentimes, the Heart Sutra that is recited and studied is a slightly shorter version than what we recite, because here, this is like a regular sutra. There is a prologue, telling the setting and where the Buddha was and who he was with and what's happening. And at a certain point, when the discussion between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, reaches a certain point, it's that from that point is where a lot of the Japanese versions and some of the Sanskrit versions only take that part. So sort of like the middle of it, most of it. But here, the version that was the longer version in Sanskrit, and as we have in Tibetan, is the one that we recited that tells a little bit of the prologue and everything. Okay. So one of the interesting things about the Heart Sutra is that the subject matter actually is very conducive to kind of a review of all of the Buddha's teaching. Because the statement by Avalokiteshvara through it, when he's talking about emptiness, he's saying form is empty and so forth, and all of the other 5 aggregates are empty, and the 6 faculties are empty, and the 12 entrances are empty, and the 18 dhatus are empty, and the 12 links are empty, and the 4 noble truths are empty. All of those are objects that were conceived to be truly existent in some of the Hinayana schools. Most of the Hinayana schools hold all phenomena to be truly existent. So, in order to understand emptiness, you have to sort of understand the basis, the conventional phenomena that are being referred to, that some people in our own minds grasp as being real and true, really findable. And the Heart Sutra is kind of an elaboration, a way to meditate on sequentially, very systematically meditate, as the monks at Sarah did when they would recite it very slowly. Meditate on each one. Form is empty. Meditate on that for some time. Not just form is empty, emptiness is form. So, just to give a little bit of a background on the text itself, the setting is one in which the Buddha is where? Where does the sutra take place? In Bodh Gaya? Vulture Hill, or Vulture Peak, right? Vulture Hill. In Rajagriha. Where's Rajagriha? What is it called today? Rajgir. It's kind of abbreviated the name. Raja means what? King. Griha means city, so it means like the royal city. And it was one of the places where Buddha taught a lot, but particularly outside the city on a mountain that was called, could be translated as Mass of Vultures Peak. It's not really clear why it was called that. There are different interpretations in the different commentaries. Maybe one of the interesting, the different reasons, some sound quite sensible, like, the way that the rocks were arranged, it looked like there were a bunch of vultures up there. Because it actually says, Pungpo means mass, in this case, Mass of Vultures Peak. Another one of the interpretations is that the bodhisattvas and the people who were actually listening to the sutra, there were so many of them, they couldn't fit on this small little area. Some of them were hovering in space. So it became called that. But it was called that before the time the Buddha taught, perhaps. Not really clear. So maybe there were some historical reasons why it was called that also. So the Buddha is there, and as is one of the places where he taught the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras on other occasions also. And he is there in meditation. And most of the sutra takes place while the Buddha is in deep concentration. It's a conversation between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. So you might say, well, where's the sutra? The Buddha. Where's the Buddha? We think of a sutra as something, the words of the Buddha, right? Or maybe not. Is that what you think, Tenzin? Kind of think that. Well, different kinds of sutras. Some of them were inspired by Buddha's presence. Sometimes in the presence of the Dalai Lama, some other Lama may give a discourse, and others might kind of understand it as the Dalai Lama's discourse, because he was inspired somehow by the setting, and the Dalai Lama or the Buddha would have arranged things in this way. So the Buddha is here in deep concentration, particular kind of samadhi. And Shariputra kind of comes to Shariputra's mind, not disturbing the Buddha, to ask the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Now remember who Shariputra was. The foremost in what? Cooking? What? Wisdom, right? Shariputra is foremost in wisdom. So he's going to ask Avalokiteshvara, what about, how do the Bodhisattvas practice wisdom? You know, when the Bodhisattvas practice the perfection of wisdom, what do they do? You know, he was trying to check out because he knows the whole ball of wax from the lesser vehicle point of view, right? Meditating on the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects and impermanence and anatma from the gross point of view when we studied in tenets like the Vaibhashika point of view of selflessness and so forth. So he asks Avalokiteshvara, and Avalokiteshvara, out of his kindness, tells him, he speaks for a long time about how the Bodhisattvas meditate on emptiness, not just on selflessness. And he even mentions the mantra of the perfection of wisdom. And then at the end, the Buddha arises from his concentration and says, yep, that's right. That's exactly right. What Avalokiteshvara said is good, and even the Tathagatas, the other Buddhas, would rejoice about this as teaching. And then everyone, all of the crowd around, including the gods and nagas and Gandharvas, and smell eaters and so forth, everyone was sort of blissed out from the words of the Buddha. I mean, they were probably, they may have just thought Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra were having an interesting conversation, but now when the Buddha okayed it, it took on another aspect. So let's take a little break. Let's have a tea break, and we'll start in a couple minutes. So during the break, Tenzin was asking about, he had a little query, a little question. He said, well, I thought Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara were of different schools. Is that right? Michelle, what do you think? Yeah, were they talking to one another? I mean, why would they even talk? They're different.
I don't know.
No, I didn't say it. I'm not blaming you, don't I?
No.
It's not like something bad happened and you know, did you see it?
I still haven't gotten over being called on in 4th grade, so.
Oh, wow.
I'm working on it though this year.
4th grade. What do you think, Thea? Were they of different schools? What does that mean, schools? So we use these words, and it'd be good to kind of, at least, even if we use them, to try to be precise with what they mean. They were practitioners. Avalokiteshvara was a practitioner of what yana? Which vehicle? The Mahayana, right? Actually, precisely the Mahayana, we say the Bodhisattva yana. Actually, from the Gelugpa tradition, when we talk about the 3 yanas, it's not as in the Nyingma or Khargyu's traditions where they talk about 9 yanas or something. We talk about the Shravaka yana, the Pratyeka Buddha yana, and the what? Bodhisattva yana. So those are called the 3 yanas. Yana means what? Not yada. That's Jerry Seinfeld. Right? Yana. Vehicle. Yana. Not just Shravaka means hearer. So that Shravakayana means the vehicle of the hearers. They were the individuals who were like Shariputra and Mahamodgalyana, and most of the arhats were that you hear about in the sutras are Shravakas, hearers, because the Pratyeka Buddhas, they're also practitioners of the Hinayana. They have their own yana. They're the ones that don't meditate simply on the Four Noble Truths. They meditate on wisdom more deeply using what? Remember from Tenet's class? From what did the Pratyeka Buddhas take as their main object of understanding? The Four Noble Truths? The 12 links. They go into more detail. They take a longer time to achieve nirvana. They accumulate merit for like 100 eons. And in their last lifetime, they manifest achieving nirvana without any Buddha being in the world. Kind of like solitary. Don't like to be under the thumb of others. The bodhisattvas are those that are practitioners of the Mahayana. Buddha also used the word Mahayana. But when we talk about Tantra, also we can say Mahayana has two kinds, the Bodhisattvayana and the Tantrayana. Both of them are Mahayana vehicles, right? The Tantrayana is kind of like the esoteric or secret presentation of the Buddha's teachings. So all of these various vehicles, the Shravakayana, the Pratyeka Buddhayana, the Bodhisattvayana, and the Tantrayana were all taught during the life of Buddha by Buddha to different people. Sometimes manifesting as Vajradhara, he taught the Vajrayana. He didn't usually teach it in the aspect of being Shakyamuni Buddha, right? He taught in the aspect of being the Supreme Nirmanakaya as Shakyamuni Buddha. He taught mainly these three vehicles, the Shravakayana, Pratyeka Buddhayana, and the Bodhisattvayana. So the fact that Avalokiteshvara was a bodhisattva and a practitioner of the Bodhisattvayana didn't mean that he couldn't talk to Shariputra. No. Shariputra, in general, in the Mahayana Sutras, in the entourage of the people listening, there were some bodhisattvas, some of the disciples were there. Maybe some of them were actually emanations of Buddha. Maybe they were actually, Buddha himself manifesting as arhats who had the curiosity to ask these kind of questions, because that's the whole basis for the Heart Sutra. Shariputra is asking from the Hinayana point of view, Shravakayana point of view, asking Avalokiteshvara, how do the Bodhisattvas practice the perfection of wisdom? Because in general, when we studied tenets, or if you haven't studied it yet, if you hear about it, from the point of view of Chandrakirti and the great Indian pundits, even the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas have to realize emptiness of true existence. It's not enough just to understand the gross selflessness of persons, right? So what differentiates the Hinayana from the Mahayana? The main differentiation is not wisdom. The main differentiation is method, right? And what's the main method of the Hinayana? Do you know, Frank? We talk about method. The main method, you could say that, or renunciation. Renunciation, main method, and understanding karma, so forth. How they deal with conventional reality. The main method in the, in terms of methodology, how to practice the path in the Mahayana is what? Bodhicitta, conventional bodhicitta, good heart, altruistic wish to achieve enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. So the method side, sort of like the father differentiates, the father lineage differentiates the Hinayana from the Mahayana. But still, the wisdom that is taught mainly in the Hinayana Sutras is mainly just talking about the selflessness of persons. It doesn't talk about, in detail, to the same degree as in the Mahayana Sutras, about the emptiness of phenomena, right? It's mainly just talking about anatma, no self. In fact, the word shunyata, and when I did some research in the Theravada canon, there are some sutras where the word shunyata comes, but the meaning the Buddha used in that case was a little bit different than what we mean by shunyata. They don't usually use the word emptiness. They're talking about selflessness. So there's a lot of debate about this, something you can spend many years and lifetimes studying about. What's the meaning that the Hinayana Arhats actually realize emptiness? Seems like they have to really realize the object of negation, the self, not just a self which is self-supporting, substantially existent, but the appearance of a self which is truly existent. And they have to be able to refute that with some kind of convincing, logical reasoning. Then, whether they apply it to other things, they don't necessarily apply it in detail to other things, but they do have to realize that degree of subtlety. The bodhisattvas, however, because they make a vow to remain within cyclic existence, not to enter into nirvana quickly, but to achieve enlightenment, which is going to take, in the bodhisattva vehicle, may take as long as 3 countless great eons to accumulate merit. Right? So they have to have a greater understanding of emptiness, not just applied to the person, but to other phenomena, to coming and going, to processes, to time, to the directions, everything, all objects of thought that might be conceptualized as being truly existent, to overcome the obstacles that might occur to helping sentient beings over a long period of time. They have to train in emptiness through many, many different kind of logical reasonings. So there is a difference in the presentation of emptiness. So although Shariputra may have had some understanding of emptiness, certainly selflessness from the Hinayana point of view, he was asking, he knew, because he was present when the Buddha was teaching the bodhisattvas, he knew that the bodhisattvas practiced in a different way. So that's kind of the situation. In general, when the Buddha taught the Hinayana Sutras, at least in the Theravada canon, in the Hinayana Sutras, does it say that there were bodhisattvas present? Because in our sutra, it says there was a great assembly of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. A great sangha. The word, in this case, assembly, is actually sangha, mahasangha. So there were both regular monks, hearers, and solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas present during the Mahayana Sutra. What about in the Hinayana Sutras? Are there, do you know, Venerable? Do you hear bodhisattvas being present?
I can't think of an example.
I believe in the Hinayana, in the Theravada canon, it doesn't mention that any bodhisattvas are present. In general, the bodhisattvas, their conception, their understanding is bodhisattvas are very, very rare. We talk about the bodhisattva. And that's why you don't find in the Theravada canon, the Hinayana, you don't find explanation of how to practice the bodhisattva path. In fact, when the Buddha explained, when the great Mahayana saints explained that the Buddha's teachings on the Mahayana were authentic, that they were actually the teachings of Buddha, when the Theravada would say, no, the Buddha didn't teach that, that's just made up, the Mahayana Sutras. The Buddha didn't teach that. The Mahayana would, one of the ways they would counter that is that the Mahayana had to be Buddha's teachings. Otherwise, there's no way for bodhisattvas to know how to practice the bodhisattva path. Because the Hinayana teachings, the Pali Canon, the Theravada Canon, doesn't explain in detail how to practice the bodhisattva teachings. So indeed, Shariputra is, they're in essence of different vehicles, but still talking to one another. unlike our Republicans and Democrats. So the names, Shariputra in Tibetan, the Tibetans have a very cute way of saying Shariputra. Do you know how they say Shariputra? Sharipu. Isn't that cute? Shari, like that. And Avalokiteshvara, what is it in Tibetan, do you know? Chenrezi. Avalokiteshvara. So the end of that, Ishvara, Teshvara, actually it's Ishvara, and because of the way that the grammar comes, when it looks like Eshvara. Avalokiteshvara. Ishvara means what? Actually, there's one god called Ishvara, right? Kind of one of the names of Shiva and Indra and so forth. But Ishvara in general means endowed with power. In Tibetan we say Wangchuk. Okay, rich in power. So Avalokita, sometimes we just say Avalokita, which means Chenrezik, one who looks down with mercy. When we say Chenrezi Wangchuk, then the long name is Avalokiteshvara. So I'm just saying this because Tenzin had not heard the Sanskrit name before, so there's so many syllables. Avalokiteshvara. Long one, right? The one I always mention was one of the 8 great bodhisattvas with the longest name. Maybe it's not even longer. Is it? What is it? The one I'm thinking of? Yeah, Sarva Nivarana Vishkambini. Okay, it's 10 syllables longer. So you could just imagine the schoolyard. Whereas some of the others were like, Akashagarbha, it's not so bad, Even Avalokiteshvara is not as bad as Sarva Nivarana Vishkambini. What did his mother call him? Sarva or Nivarana? Anyway, I'm just joking. Okay.
They refer to Shahar and Vataputra and Shariputra.
Sharadvatiputra, right. So
more
in
formal name of Shariputra?
there, Shari, and when we get into the commentary, we can check again, but Shari is the name of Shariputra's mother. So Shariputra means the son of Shari. Okay, Putra means son. Another, I believe still her name, but maybe another, in the marital context, another way of her name being presented, and formal way, sort of his formal name is Sharitvati Putra. So I'll have to check exactly why, but that's actually how it is in the Sanskrit and in the Tibetan, but oftentimes people they just say Shariputra both times. But in some of the places it says Shariputra, other times it says Sharitvati Putra. I'll have to check exactly. We can see in the commentaries. It has to do with just the way that names were used.
Robert and Bob.
Maybe like that. I'm not sure. Okay, so let's just look a little bit at the beginning of the sutra, and then we'll also we'll go to the commentary sometime. Where did we go here? Teaching prayer space. Okay. So in the Tibetan, we have the title. Here it says, it just has the Sanskrit in this translation on the right side. On the left side, it has a Tibetan, but it doesn't have it in English phonetics. It says, Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. Do you see that? The page 9. So in the left side of the page, although those of you who don't read Tibetan won't see this, in the version that I think Soma will print up for us, it has it in there in Tibetan. Usually in the Tibetan, when the sutra comes, it says Gyakar Kedu, first of all. Do you know what that means? Gyakar Kedu means what? In the language of India, in the Indian language. And then it would give, in Tibetan letters, but you would read it out, Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. Then it says, underneath that, it says Pökedu, which means in Tibetan. Pö means Tibet. Pöke means Tibetan language, the language of Tibet. In Tibetan, then they would say Pakpa Chomden Dema Sherab Ge Parul Tu Chinpe Ningbo. So that's the title. Do you know that one?
No.
Oh, there's such a big smile. I thought you'd suddenly that it meant something to you. So generally, we have to understand a little bit about the titles of the texts because they, first of all, as you've studied, as we've mentioned in our study of Uttara Tantra and some of the other texts, generally when texts were translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan, the Buddhist texts, there would always be, at the beginning of the Tibetan translation, it would always say Gyakar Kedu, that means it's in Sanskrit, and it would give the Sanskrit title. One of the reasons for that, and then it would give the Tibetan title, that translated into Tibetan below it. One of the reasons for that was that to show the authenticity, that this was not just something that Tibetans wrote, invented. You know, like today, anyone who wants to write can write a book, and you can even publish it on kind of desktop publishing and have Amazon put it on their website. I heard that some authors, you know, Amazon has reviews. Have you heard about this? Amazon.com has review of the books. Some of the people who write the books write their own reviews, anonymous, of the book, you know, praising it highly. They found out about some of it. And so there's a big kind of, I don't know if you'd call scandal about this, you know. So, and of course, if someone who's your rival writes a book and you don't like it, you can just write this scathing review. But anyway, one of the reasons for showing the Sanskrit title is to show that it's authentic, or a venerable source, or of authentic lineage. Remember in our Lan Rim outlines when we were talking in class a little bit earlier. Another reason is that the Sanskrit language is said to be very blessed, also blissed. I remember Lama Yeshe was talking about blissing, granting blessings. It's said that all the Buddhas that come as universal teachers, you know what I mean by universal teachers? Many, many people become Buddhas in the world, not in the aspect of like Shakyamuni, you know, under the Bodhi tree and so forth. People practice through the Bodhisattva path, through Tantra and so forth, and achieve enlightenment. But of the people, of the Buddhas, many will appear in the world because of their karma. Later, they take the aspect in a period that is dark of being born in the highest lineage and descending from Tushita heaven and taking rebirth in the highest lineage and enacting the 12 deeds altogether. And one of those deeds is to achieve enlightenment. Such a kind of person is called a universal teacher. They represent, not represent, represent, reteach the Buddhist teachings. It might be different in different times, different emphasis. You know how those teachings are given. They turn the wheel of Dharma, in other words, for the wheel of Dharma that previous Buddhas have fallen into decay because of the karma of sentient beings and time and so forth. Those are called universal teachers. So not every Buddha is, at the time that they're showing Buddhahood, is a universal teacher. It's only when Shakyamuni Buddha taught, only a universal teacher that was appearing in this world system was Shakyamuni Buddha. In fact, even if there are other Buddhas, even if the other some of the other bodhisattvas or arhats or even seemingly ordinary people were actually manifestations of Buddhas or bodhisattvas, very highly realized beings. None of them took the aspect, any of the enlightened ones, of the correct ones, you might say, took the aspect of criticizing Shakyamuni and saying, I know better, and I'm going to teach you something he didn't teach, or like that. It's said that for many, many reasons, that's why when the Buddhas appear, only one universal teacher appears in the world at any one time, right? So, it's said that all of the teachers, the founders, the Tomba, that's what that word, I'm not sure, I can't remember the Sanskrit word, we can check. All of those who teach or show the Dharma, universal teachers, founders of the Dharma that return the wheel of Dharma, all of them will teach in Sanskrit. Of course, in the Theravada canon, in the Pali canon, what do they say the Buddha taught in? Pali, which is what?
The vernacular language of India.
Is actually it's one of the vernaculars. I'm not sure if it's considered. I think they call it a Prakrit, which is like one of the vernaculars. Prakrit and Sanskrit. Sanskrit is kind of like Latin, we could say maybe, and maybe Pali is a little bit like Romano or Italian. Ancient Italian, when Latin was still being spoken, and the people who didn't speak proper Latin. So that's not to say that the Buddha didn't, in the Mahayana Sutra, to say that the Buddhists teach in Sanskrit doesn't mean that the Buddhas didn't teach in Prakrit. In fact, the Buddha said in many sutras, you should teach according to the language of the people. And there's much meaning to that. Teach according to the understanding of people, according to the words that they use. Don't, use things that are inappropriate. But it said that all of the Buddhas will teach in Sanskrit, whether it mean also the vernaculars like that. And this is the language that's spoken in the God realms. So for the auspiciousness also, besides showing the authentic source of the sutras, the fact that the teaching is, the name is given in Sanskrit, also to leave imprints to be able to encounter Sanskrit in the future. The name of the text is given in Sanskrit.
So is all the Buddhas in this fortunate year, not all the Buddhas? What was the question?
She said, is it just the Buddhas in this fortunate eon who will speak Sanskrit? That's what you're saying, right? Yes. Or all the Buddhas? I made a wee exaggeration there. You didn't say so many alls. With my limited mind, I can't say all the Buddhas will say, but that's what I understand, that all the universal teachers will teach in Sanskrit. So there's some special blessing of that language. And third reason, another reason, not to say the third reason, another reason is to remind the reader of the kindness of the translators. The translators, not that the translators did it so that they can kind of, you better remember me, how kind I was to translate this, but also to recognize that because all of the texts in Tibetan, the Kangyur and Tengyur, the Tripitaka, you might say, the Kangyur, and the commentaries to that by the Indian pundits, they were all translated from Sanskrit with great effort, and there had to be a lot of work done and scholarly preparation and so forth. So that's another reason for the titles. The kings and so forth said that the titles had to be given in Sanskrit also first, show that it's authentic, to leave imprints in the mind, to remember the kindness of the translators and so forth. So what does this name mean? Arya, do you know what Arya means? Pardon? Noble. In the Buddhist In the Buddhist context, is there another meaning? I mean, we also translate it as noble, but who are Arya beings? Do you know, Don?
Those that have had a direct perception of emptiness.
Right. Those who are actual Sangha, path of seeing, realized emptiness directly, are noble beings, higher beings. We talk about, what did Hitler talk about? The Aryan race, right? Supposedly, according to some scholars, the northern people that came into India as with this new language, that the origin of which came into our Western world, also as the Indo-European languages, they called themselves superior beings, as opposed to the Dravidian, the darker people. So there's some kind of derogatory, condescending use of the word of warring people in the past, calling themselves superior, perhaps like a little bit like Hitler did. But they're also, from a Buddhist perspective, there's a very positive meaning. Superior beings, the Buddha said, were superior because they realized emptiness directly. Or from the Hinayana point of view, they realized the Four Noble Truths directly. But here, when you give titles of the sutras, the word Arya often comes in the title, and there it doesn't necessarily mean Arya being. It means, as Vimal had said, kind of the noble or the exalted sutra. It says the Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. So we know the word Arya and we know the word sutra, right? Sutra, what does sutra mean? Do you know? Anyone know? Was it?
It's like the beads on a rosary being threaded together.
Can mean that. It kind of can mean a discourse. So one set of words that threaded together, continued together. Not necessarily, sort of like succession or discourse. So in general, sutra means discourse. So you could say it's the discourse on the so-and-so. Here, when we talk about the Bhagavati, do you know the word Bhagavan? Do we talk about Bhagavan sometime? Where did we talk about Bhagavan? Or maybe it was in our Tibetan class, but have you heard? Bhagavan? Bhagavati? Bhagavan is the Sanskrit word. Oh, you've heard of Bhagwan, or what do they say in the West? Bhagwan. You've heard of Bhagwan Rajneesh? Same word, right? Who is the Bhagwan? What did it mean? You heard of Rajneesh? They called him the Bhagwan, right? So sometimes Bhagwan is just translated as Lord or, yeah, something like that. Bhagavan is actually how it is in Sanskrit, 3 syllables, not Bhagwan or Bhagawan, but Bhagavan, is one of the epithets of the Buddha, and we say Chomdende in Tibetan. That's the Tibetan version. So it has different kinds of meaning. Sometimes you could just say someone who's the Lord in a very simple way, but usually in Sanskrit, in Indian usage of the word, it kind of had the implication of someone endowed with certain auspicious qualities, 8 greatnesses or something like that. We'll talk more about this. And so in the name Chom Den De, remember what Den means from our class today? Endowed, right? So Chom Den De, Chom means someone who has destroyed the foes, destroyer. Den means endowed. De means transcendent, gone beyond. So sometimes Lama Zopa Rinpoche translated it as the endowed transcendent destroyer, Bhagawan. people who are used to just thinking Bhagawan means Lord, they think the Tibetan maybe is a bit exaggerated to make it so long. But there is an etymology for those different meanings. Usual meaning of Bhagawan, one of the ones is that endowed with certain qualities. We'll see that when we talk about the commentary. But you'll see that. It's one of the very, very common epithets of the Buddha. In the sutras, when it's talking about going from one person to another, it says, the Bhagawan said, this referring to the Buddha. You didn't refer to the other disciples or anyone else as the Bhagawan. Probably in the time of Rajneesh, you didn't refer to anyone else as the Bhagawan, right?
So the translation, blessed one, is mainly focusing on that idea of endowed.
Well, when the blessed one is kind of like just a one-word translation, if you would just say what it means, kind of like Lord or blessed one. That's kind of like a very rough meaning. If you just look in the dictionary, that's probably in the Sanskrit dictionary, that's one of the possible meanings. But the etymology that the Buddha gave in the sutras, when he explained what Bhagavan meant, he gave other kinds of explanations you can find in the sutras and in the commentaries. So the Mahayana often has a different etymology of these terms than the Sanskrit etymology. And some Sanskritists would say it's kind of creative etymology. That's not what the Sanskrit actually said, kind of like they're just trying to make up something to fit the Buddhist understanding. So you have to try to understand it in some way. Maybe the Buddha, with omniscient mind, did know the original, prehistoric other realms what the word meant, and it does mean that in some cases. But that's how we understand Bhagawan. It's a name of the Buddha. It's an epithet. You know what epithet means? What does epithet mean? Lisa, you know epithet. Can you look on do you have a dictionary on your computer? What are you taking? Are you transcribing? Or you're just writing notes, or are you doing your email, or what are you doing? Oh, okay. I thought you're not doing your email. Not right now, anyway. Okay. Yeah, an epithet is usually an honorific name, isn't it? Can epithet? Can you say the bum? Can that be an epithet? Maybe. Maybe epithets can be negative too, but it means it's something that's illustrative about someone, either generally something positive, maybe in some cases it can also mean something negative. Yeah? Could be. Okay, so the title, Arya Bhagavati. So Bhagavati is the feminine of Bhagavan. In the Tibetan it says Chomden Dema. Remember in class you were saying is Lobma feminine because it ends in M, ma. But here that Lobma generally means disciple. It doesn't mean feminine. Here Chomden Dema is the feminine of Chomden De. So it means the feminine has a feminine principle. Why is that? Because the perfection of wisdom is considered to be feminine, the mother. Why is that? It gives birth to the Buddhas and the Shravakas and the Pratika Buddhas. It's like the understanding when we talk about why wisdom is called the mother and method is called the father. Kind of like in the sense of the Indian lineages. If you were born to a royal father, you were of royal lineage. Even if your mother was of some other lineage, warrior lineage or untouchable lineage or whatever, if your father was a certain lineage, that's the lineage that you would have. So the perfection of wisdom is kind of like the mother, because it is common to all the lineages, the lineage of the Pratika Buddhas, the Shravakas, and the Bodhisattvas. What differentiate those lineages is the father, the motivation, the method side. Okay, so the perfection of wisdom is called the mother. It's not as though, well, I don't want to rain on your parade, but it's not. I'm not. Some feminists would take it as kind of like an affirmation of the superiority. I've seen this in some courses, like superiority of the woman. The Buddha was saying the women. Women are superior. It's the wisdom. We all are composed of female and male energy. We have a method side and a sort of male energy. Some women have very strong male energy, sort of male method, sort of sometimes aggressive, sometimes very skillful in the world as executives. Men sometimes have very deep insight and sort of open, they're, what do they say, nurturing my feminine side. Isn't that what they say, something like that? So here it's called the Bhagavati. So Bhagavati is referring to the perfection of wisdom. So it says, the Bhagavati Prajna Paramita. This kind of going together. Prajna means what? Do you remember from our study of mind and mental factors? Wisdom. What's the Tibetan word for that, prajna? Sherab. So this is here, prajna is talking about a special kind of wisdom that realizes emptiness. When we talk about the prajna paramita. Paramita means what? Can mean perfection, or what? Can mean the practice gone beyond. So, gone to the other shore. Parul to chinpa. Chinpa means gone. Parul means other side. So it means gone beyond the ordinary. Transcendent. The six transcendent practices, or the six perfections, can mean also perfections, because when you get to the other side, you're perfected. Or you could just say gone beyond. That's how often Kanza and other people have translated it. The wisdom gone beyond. Have you seen that? That sometimes that's another way of translating the perfection of wisdom, or transcendent wisdom. So that's prajna paramita. How many paramitas are there? Do you know that the bodhisattvas are supposed to practice? 6. Sometimes we talk about 6. Sometimes we talk about 10. When we talk about 6, we mentioned before generosity, morality, ethics, patience. That's good. Effort, perseverance. Yeah, you need concentration, stabilization, and wisdom. So the first 5 are kind of method. The 6th one is wisdom. The perfection of wisdom is called the prajna paramita. We say, what do we call dana paramita? Like when you do the succession yoga of Kala Chakra, there's a mantra of each of these. Dana paramita, what is it? Shila paramita, so forth. Each one has a different name. Shila paramita is what? It's a lady down in Australia. Shila in Sanskrit means morality, right? It means sultram. And paramita means perfection. So the perfection of ethics or perfection of morality. So here, the prajna paramita. Hridaya means heart or essence. Sometimes it's translated as the essence of the perfection of wisdom, because hridaya can mean essence, can also mean heart. So literally, when we say Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Sutra, the title that's translated in this text right here, and hopefully in the other text it has all the words there. The Arya, what would you say, the noble or the exalted Bhagavati, perfection of wisdom, the heart of the perfection of wisdom sutra. sometimes just briefly called the Heart Sutra. That's just Hridaya, but that's not the name of this is the actual name of the sutra. Because it's not just talking about heart, it's talking about the heart of the Bhagavati Prajna Paramita. This Bhagavati, hard to translate it in one word in English if you wanted to say the lady or the exalted lady or the endowed transcendent destroyer. Anyway, the Prajna Paramita itself, this perfection of wisdom, is sometimes what's the right word? The anthropomorphic representation of it is a female deity, like in the cover of this text. Do you have on the cover of yours? Yeah. This is the peaceful Prajna Paramita. There are different versions in Tantra also of Prajna Paramita. Do you know what the wrathful Prajna Paramita looks like? I don't know. Do you know what it's called? This deity is just called Prajna Paramita. It's a female deity, female energy. The lion-faced Dakini is one of the wrathful aspects of the perfection of wisdom. So sometimes when we recite the perfection of wisdom, sutra, to eliminate obstacles, afterwards there's some verses to consciously and ritually imagine the hindrances being eliminated, in which case you recite the perfection of wisdom sutra, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom. Tayata gati gati paragati parasamgati bodhisvaha, many times or one time. And also you recite the mantra of the wrathful perfection of wisdom, the lion-faced Dakini. You visualize, invoke her. There's a verse in that, if we have time, we'll talk about, that comes in the prayer here. It comes in the prayers, right? Invoke, what does it say? I prostrate to the gathering, on the next page actually, page 13. I prostrate to the gathering of Dakinis in the three chakras. Well, I'm not sure what it means, the three chakras and the three wheels, who abide in the holy yoga of using space, enjoying space, kacho. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamara shasadara samarayape. And usually we recite that 21 times. And I think usually you recite pushing the beads away from you when you do these mantras of eliminating obstacles. So if auspiciously the obstacles are going away, rather than usually when you recite mantras, you're pulling the beads toward you, right? When you recite these mantras, if you see it's kind of hard for me to do. You push the beads away 21 times. So there are both peaceful and wrathful prajna paramitas. Also, the lion-faced Dakini is female aspect. Okay. So this is the title of the text, Arya Bhagavati Prajna Paramita Hridaya Sutra. So let's just begin a little bit, just for auspiciousness. The very first beginning of the sutra, first lines, in this actual, from the Sanskrit, not the Japanese version, which doesn't start like this, but it begins as all the sutras did. Thus did I hear at one time. Tibetan says, Dike Dagi Tupa Duchikna. Sometimes people translate it as, once upon a time, I heard. But if you, all of the commentaries, the Sanskrit and the Tibetan lamas, even Geshe Zopa, I remember, mentioned the translation that people were using in Deer Park a couple of years ago wasn't quite right, because it means, thus did I hear on one occasion. That's kind of the implication. It doesn't mean, kind of the implication, one of the implications is that the person heard the Buddha teaching it. Although Ananda, when he recited the sutras, some of the sutras he recited, he wasn't actually present. He actually heard it from other people later. So there's some kind of, you have to check what exactly that means. But generally what it means is this took place on a certain occasion and I was there. I heard it at one time. It doesn't mean once upon a time I heard or something like that. Maybe it could mean the same thing. I don't know, once upon a time. I don't know. So, this is very famous. This is the line that comes at the beginning of all the sutras. What is it? What is it in Sanskrit? Do you know? What? Ata. Oh no, that's not this one. This is. What is it? I can't remember in Sanskrit. Evam. You know evam? You know what evam means? Do you know, Venerable? Evam means thus. Okay, I'll have to find. It comes in the actual dimension. Does it say here? Just for auspiciousness, the first line. Thus did I hear at one time. Does he give the Sanskrit? I can't. I'll find for you. I don't see it right immediately. So, one of the meanings of that phrase in the Pali Canon is that this is being recited by Ananda, who was Ananda anyway? Who's attendant?
The Buddha's attendant.
The Buddha's attendant his whole life?
No.
Was Ananda from another part of the country, or what was he?
He was his cousin.
It was close relation with Buddha, maybe cousin. Did he come when Buddha left Kapilavastu, cut his hair and left? Did Ananda come along with him?
No.
So he wasn't his attendant then. He had another attendant, who brought back the horse and everything. And later, when the Buddha achieved enlightenment, Ananda and some of the other relatives of Buddha wanted to, you were there, weren't you, Mo, when we talked about the 12 deeds? So they wanted to join, kind of like, oh boy, he's made it. We're the same lineage. We're also of the Shakya lineage, so we're going to go. We'll be big shots. And so they left, and they brought along the barber, Upali, as their attendant. And they told him to bring back all their jeweled ornaments back to the castle once they changed into more ordinary clothes and their jewels and everything. And Upali wanted to come along too, and he's very clever. He said, but if I do that, they'll think I murdered you, and they'll kill me without checking. And they all said, well, okay, you can come along. So when Ananda, also, who else came on that trip? I think also Devadatta, who was another relative of the Buddha's, who became one of the great protagonists of Buddha, came also in that group. I think there were 5 or so. So when they came and they were ordained by Buddha, the Buddha kind of shocked them by ordaining Upali first. He was the barber, sort of like, low caste. The rest of them were Shakyas, Republicans. I'm joking, excuse me. And so he actually, Upali, after the Buddha passed away, what was Upali the foremost in? Do you know? It may have been that, but the Buddha didn't mention that. Upali was the foremost in?
He memorized the Vinaya.
He was the foremost in the Vinaya, in the discipline. So when the Vinaya was recited, Upali recited the Vinaya. And Ananda recited the sutras. And I think maybe Kashyapya, supposedly, there's some unclarity about this, recited the Abhidharma. But anyway, this is another story. Anyway, of the Hinayana Sutras. So it's unclear whether Ananda, although Ananda may have been here, whether Ananda actually recited this sutra, Mahayana Sutra. But Ananda didn't become the Buddha's attendant immediately. It was the Buddha was already quite advanced in age when he needed another attendant, a special attendant, and Ananda took that duty on. And he wanted to be present at all of the teachings that Buddha gave and have unhindered access. Anytime he had a question, one of the requirements was that he had to be able to come and ask his questions to the Buddha at any time. So that was one of the relatives of Buddha. So thus that I hear at one time kind of has that implication. So the Bhagavan, thus did I hear at one time, the implication is not that I heard this following story, but I was there, I was present. This is what I heard at one time. And the situation was that the Bhagavan, the Buddha, the endowed transcendent destroyer, was dwelling on Mass of Vultures mountain in Rajagriha. Griha means city, I said before, so it means the royal city, together with a great sangha. Here it says great community. This is sort of a common way of translating it, but the actual word in Sanskrit and in Tibetan we say gendun. Remember we were talking about gedun and gendun? We would say gendun, chempo. Gelongi gendun chempo dang, a great assembly of gelongs, of bhikshus, and a great assembly of bodhisattvas, a great sangha of bhikshus and a great sangha of bodhisattvas. Sangha, the word sangha, we think of it when we talk about the triple gem, sangha, right? But sangha can mean just community or group, because the group of the Buddhist disciples are called a sangha. The word sangha in Sanskrit can just mean group, so it kind of has that implication here. So the Buddha was dwelling on Vulture's Peak, or the Mass of Vulture's Mountain, more precisely, in Rajagriha, together with this great sangha of bhikshus. So that mainly means Hinayana practitioners. The arhats were there, and a great community, a great sangha of bodhisattvas. In the Vajrakutta Sutra, how many, you remember, Venerable, how many monks are supposed to be there, the sangha? Do you remember any of them? It actually says, was it 12,500 or something? I don't know, you can check. Actually mentions a certain number of monks, which comprised, there's different ways of figuring that out. The disciples that came from that occasion and the disciples that came from the conversion of that rishi's disciples added up to this number. So that's usually, that number, like in the Vajrakutta Sutra, is usually found in other sutras also. It's not just like a number that you pull out of your ear or your hat or something. It's a number that had some kind of reasoning behind it. From the original full, the whole group was there, all the original, the big guys, the old guys. So let's stop here, and next time, why don't you, in whatever commentary you're using, try to read ahead, and if you have questions, write them down, and we'll continue. So let's dedicate the energy, the merit that we created tonight. Incredibly fortunate to be able to think about the perfection of wisdom. As my teacher Geshe Zopa says, to sort of chew these tough bones. It's not something that people ordinarily do, to investigate in such detail the meaning of the sutras. So with a good motivation, and the actual material coming in contact with the Mahayana Sutras, being Mahayana teachings, have created some roots of virtue. let's try to make a very strong aspiration or dedication that these roots will ripen in our continued practice along the path, however long it takes, however number of lifetimes, till we achieve enlightenment for the sake of all living beings. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Buddha, a Guru Buddha, and lead all sentient beings into that very same state. Sort of like reserving this energy, dedicating it toward that goal. And then sealing it, as with the perfection of wisdom, in the emptiness of the three spheres,